So we're going to be talking about the new book I published, The Moor, the Mason, and the Alien, which is a call to action. And there's a reason why the title is named as such, because it gets into the three main aspects of what's happening on this planet with the human race and with the solar system at large as a kingdom. So naturally, I made sure to put the name Moor first to push that out in front of people's face for the Moorish legacy in the Temple of Solomon. And of course, the reference to Mason is a reference to what's happening on the opposite side of that equation, which is the Masonic agenda and the Grand Masonic Lodge. And certain elements like the Chetu regime and the Greys and so forth on the opposing team. And then, of course, the last part of it is, the reference to the alien connection there, of course. But it must be understood that what the book gets into as well is that the understanding of what is extraterrestrial intervention belongs to the Moors, people of color and hue in general, the Sunkissed people of Earth, and by extension, the white outcast or the abomination that has a means of getting back into the family of man as well. In opposition to extraterrestrial intervention, though, is the alien abduction phenomena, which is strictly for the pale skin, by ownership and by legal real estate definition of the word chattel, which of course is where we get the word cattle from, by mispronunciation.
Right.
So it gets into where does all this animosity towards the human race come from, this outright belligerent acts of human degradation that when you look at the grander scope of what's been going on for the last 500,000 years, you realize, blaming it on the callous methods of profit and greed of a corporation, that's also a symptom, because you got to have a motivating factor behind that sense of greed, or any of the 7 deadly sins for that matter. And so what's motivating the corporate titans? Why is there this carte blanche mentality to wipe the floor with the human race and treat everybody like, basically fodder that can be easily replaced? And when you start stepping back and looking at the grander scope, you realize where all this is coming from. And of course, who the good guys are that have been watching over us ever since. Okay, because I often tell people, on the side of the Moorish legacy and the bloodline of the Christs and the Temple of Solomon, you have the Adam, which is the Sasquatch, or the Yeti. But on the other side of it, you have the High Priesthood, which is known as the pharmaceutical multinational, or the Amun-Ra, and that's the Greys, or the Chetu regime, okay, on the other side of it. And so this is what you're really looking at here, are these two opposing forces, of which really it's only the bad guys that turn it into an opposing force, because for the good guys, it's a spiritual insurrection that includes the entire human race and has given the pale skin every opportunity to come back into the family of man. Whereas you have to ask yourself, where does the racial and or sexual paranoia come from on the pale skin side of the equation? Where does this sense of self-entitlement and favoritism come from? Why is there always this mentality of, I'm above the law, I can mouth off to the police, I can do whatever the hell I want, and all I'm going to do is get a slap on the wrist. I can rape a woman and get away with that. I can kill anybody I want who's 7 shades darker and nobody's going to care. So, where does this sense of self-entitlement, which is psychologically ingrained in the pale skin, come from? And sure enough, it comes from what's called the Ivory Tower of Europe, which is in its original ancient formation is one part European invasion, one part alien abduction phenomena. And those two things were combined together on purpose to put Europe up on a false pedestal of superiority above the law, and with a mandate and a decree coming down from the Greys to destroy the Temple of Solomon from the inside out. In other words, the human body, and therefore the human race.
And Europe gets its name from an African queen, African goddess, basically.
Yeah, that was the olive branch, because when they had to be banished, they named it after the African queen Europa as a means of saying, you're still part of the family, but you got to get your act together because we're not putting up with your garbage anymore.
Yeah.
So basically the idea was, you stay here until you get your act together and do your penance and learn from your own sins against Mother Earth. Unfortunately, through the master calculations and manipulations of the Greys, they knew that their prime subject of obedience, being the formation of the pale skin, was going to get banished to that transcontinental prison known as Europe, and therefore be isolated, unprotected, and psychologically damaged to the point of no return. And of course, who was waiting in the wings? The Schechter regime. And they moved in for the kill and said, hey, look at what your dark-skinned brothers and sisters did to you. How could they really love you when they dumped you here?
Yeah.
We can help you, and guess what? We'll even give you a means of getting even with them for doing this to you. And so this is where all of a sudden Europe comes, comes out of nowhere with a vengeance, with all this superior might. And the academics, they love to hail this book called Guns, Germs, and Steel as some kind of academic excuse to sweep it all away and say, well, this is why Europe was superior. No, because that's no different than the medical industry treating a symptom instead of a cause. Guns, germs, and steel are powerful symptoms, but the question that the academics refuse to ask, because they're all white academics, is what was the cause behind guns, germs, and steel?
Yeah.